October 1944, buried within the torn-apart woodlands of western Germany, the downpour wouldn't quit, and the sludge stuck to everything, as if trying to drag soldiers down. A German squad crept forward along a tight path, combat boots sinking with each footfall, weapons locked and loaded, vision sweeping the tree line for any hint of danger. They sensed security for now. Perhaps overly relaxed, because somewhere up ahead, an American shooter remained invisible in the vegetation. Drawing air slowly and evenly, pulse kept in check, studying them through a thin opening in the soaked greenery. He stayed still. He took no shortcuts. He simply held position, because holding position was the way you kept breathing out there, and discipline was what separated returning stateside and getting planted in enemy soil. This shooter wasn't legendary, and his identity never showed up in press reports back stateside, because warriors like him waged battles in anonymity, where recognition didn't count, and staying alive was the only decoration worth claiming. He was an unassuming ground trooper converted into a precision shooter, hauling a beat-up firearm, a few cartridges, and one bizarre notion that would shortly convert 3 days of engagement into an utter hellscape for the German forces. The notion was straightforward, nearly absurd when you examine it, and it demanded nothing beyond a shoelace and some elementary grasp of how dread functions. But amid the mayhem of combat, straightforward notions could destroy more efficiently than any sophisticated strategy cooked up in some commander's headquarters, miles from the action. The Germans figured they had American shooters pegged after months of intense engagement throughout France and into Germany. They considered Americans wild, rushed, and simple to corner with a touch of aggression, a couple of grenades, and forceful tactics. That conviction stemmed from observation, from witnessing American troops charge ahead quick and noisy through the French farmland, seizing territory rapidly but occasionally sloppily. But this soldier was unique. He'd figured out the brutal way that rushing got you eliminated. And discipline, blended with real dread and frantic resourcefulness, kept you drawing breath for one extra sunrise. Quick thing before we push forward. Hit subscribe if you crave more incredible World War II battle accounts like this, because World War II Documenta explores into incidents you won't encounter in standard education. And this account is only growing grimmer from here. What the Germans weren't aware of was that this shooter had been tracking them for hours before he ever squeezed off a round, analyzing their patterns, tallying their strides, committing to memory how they navigated through the woodland, and catching their chatter floating through the branches. He caught something critical that most troops would have overlooked. Every time a lone gunshot echoed out anywhere in the zone, the Germans responded the identical precise fashion without exception. They locked up for a heartbeat, then unleashed rounds toward the noise, then held in nervous stillness, then cautiously pushed forward to check. They figured one gunman. They figured a soldier manning the weapon. They figured they could crush a lone threat with manpower and ammunition. That calculation would drain them of more lives than anybody could have forecasted. The shooter grabbed a shoelace from his gear, fastened it precisely to the firing mechanism of his firearm, ran it rearward through the vegetation, and secured the opposite tip around a thin limb behind him that would yank taut when touched. Then he moved away slow and deliberate, being certain not to rustle the soaked greenery or crack any sticks, until he arrived at another concealed location about 20 yards to the flank where he commanded a clear sight of the path. From there, he held position once more with his backup firearm, digit hovering near the firing mechanism, vision fixed on the path forward, regulating his breathing and blocking out the icy downpour that drenched through his gear. When the Germans entered sight, advancing warily, but not warily sufficient, he let loose once. One precise discharge, one soldier collapsed violently. Terror erupted instantly, precisely as he'd anticipated. German firearms barked back in retaliation, rounds shredding through greenery and wood and launching fragments airborne. But the shooter had already vacated that initial location and observed from cover. As the Germans pushed forward cautiously down the path, tense and furious and intent on locating the gunman, one soldier grazed past the limb that secured the shoelace. The firearm discharged on its own, Another soldier dropped lifeless. The Germans halted, frozen, bewildered, and abruptly horrified. 2 discharges, 2 separate angles, 2 gunmen. They believed they were mistaken, but dread ignores logic. By darkness, bewilderment had settled in thoroughly among the German formations as news circulated about what was unfolding in this damned section of woodland. German commanders murmured about a shooter squad operating the zone, perhaps even a complete specialist formation deployed deliberately to halt them and tear them down. They requested for artillery assistance, but the landscape rendered it nearly worthless with all the trees soaking up the explosions, and the Americans were stationed too near to their own Allied positions to chance bombarding everything without slaughtering their own troops. So the Germans possessed no option but to advance forward once more the following dawn, exhausted, drenched completely, anxious beyond measure. And that's when the authentic destruction kicked off. The shooter duplicated the method over and over throughout the following day, changing locations non-stop, repositioning firearms in fresh spots, and exploiting the woodland itself as his ally in this lethal contest. Sometimes he fastened the shoelace to a toppled timber positioned precisely correct. Sometimes to a young sapling curved precisely adequate to activate a firing mechanism when freed. Sometimes to underground roots that would jerk the cord taut when trampled. Every discharge pulled return gunfire away from his genuine location, and every blunder the Germans committed purchased him more valuable seconds to relocate and arrange the following ambush. He scarcely rested. He scarcely consumed anything. He simply held position, absorbed cautiously to every noise, and struck when the opportunity emerged. By the conclusion of the following day, German formations outright declined to traverse through that zone without substantial covering gunfire. And even then, they wavered, debating with their commanders about whether the assignment was worth perishing for. Troops vowed on their existence they were encircled by invisible gunmen. Some swore they'd caught discharges originating from behind their own positions, as though the Americans had somehow penetrated thoroughly into German domain. Others claimed the Americans had stashed firearms everywhere across the woodland, arranged like some form of intricate death zone engineered deliberately for them. Dread propagates quicker than any round could fly, and dread renders even the finest troops sloppy, and sloppiness creates simple targets. One German detachment concluded they'd endured sufficient of holding position and attempted to charge the woodland in a frantic assault, shooting recklessly into the branches and yelling to frighten the shooter into exposing himself, or at minimum making him lose composure. It failed. The American allowed them to move directly past his location without shooting a lone round, then coolly targeted their rears as they sprinted further into the trees, downing 2 soldiers before vanishing once more like a phantom. Another shoelace ambush triggered seconds afterward when the survivors doubled back in terror, downing a 3rd soldier. The surviving troops sprinted. They never halted sprinting until they arrived at their own positions. By the 3rd sunrise, the casualty count had grown utterly devastating and impossible to dismiss. 64 German troops remained lifeless in a section of woodland no greater than a football pitch, all casualties of one disciplined American and his grasp of dread. German leadership ultimately commanded a complete withdrawal from the zone, persuaded beyond any question they were encountering a well-concealed shooter formation supported by entrenched infantry and potentially additional reinforcement. They never located him. They never even approached near to his genuine locations. When American positions pushed forward later that week and cleared through the zone, they discovered the carnage dispersed across the branches, corpses resting where they'd collapsed, brass casings scattered everywhere revealing how much ammunition the Germans had squandered shooting at phantoms and discarded equipment abandoned in utter terror. Other troops caught the account as it traveled through the formations and shook their skulls in astonishment. One soldier, one straightforward method, 3 days of absolute horror. The shooter never boasted about what he'd accomplished. He never tallied figures or discussed his eliminations. To him, it was simply another assignment completed. Another piece of territory secured sufficiently long for the conflict to advance forward and for other soldiers to assume his role. He endured the conflict, returned stateside to America, and disappeared into the backdrop of history like countless others who hauled its burden in anonymity and never sought recognition. But the teaching he abandoned still counts today. In World War II, triumph didn't constantly originate from larger firearms or more troops or superior armored vehicles. Sometimes it originated from grasping dread, maintaining discipline when everyone else lost composure, and recognizing that a shoelace fastened precisely correct could destroy more efficiently than a complete platoon shooting blindly. Thanks for watching this account from World War II Documenta about one of the most unusual and lethal shooter strategies of the complete conflict. If you found this video insightful, like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more World War II Documenta. Thanks for watching.